Uhuru, everybody, welcome. Good to see everybody here. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar or in-person event. And tonight's webinar is called Reparations and Wealth Redistribution, What You Can Do. My name is Len Demmer, and I'm the coordinator of the Reparations Legacy Project. And tonight we will not only be hearing from two revolutionary presentations, but this event will also be a call to action for everybody tuning in digitally and also here in person to hear about how you can participate in the worldwide reparations movement led by the African working class. And we are, So it's very exciting. We are broadcasting live here from the Uhuru Solidarity Center, which is a building that is owned by Black Star Industries, who is extending the struggle for African liberation into the white colonizer population on the south side of the Del Mar Divide, where all of the stolen resources of African people are being hoarded. And we have some people in our live audience here tonight that are from all over the country. We have some comrades here from Portland, from Oakland, from Philadelphia, Minneapolis, and of course, St. Louis. They're all here as part of a reparations summer organizing intensive. And this reparations summer project is in the context of the overall organizing intensive that's led by the African People's Socialist Party throughout the month of July. And within this whole past week, members of this organizing intensive have gone door to door distributing 5,250 pieces of literature in total, calling, really salute all the comrades. This literature is calling for white people to unite with the African community's struggle for reparations. And we've really had a lot of positive responses from the white community. And it's just really been an awesome week. So just salute all of our comrades for visiting in town. So let's see, we also, actually not sure how many people are, we do have some people tuning in on our Zoom as well. So if you are tuning in on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, make sure you say where you are tuning in from as well. So next slide, please. So the Reparations Legacy Project organizes white people with access to social, generational, and financial wealth to take a stand in repairing the damage of enslavement and ongoing exploitation of African people through the redistribution of resources toward the Black self-determination programs of the Uhuru movement. Next slide. The Reparations Legacy Project is a campaign of the Uhuru Solidarity movement that organizes white people with access to financial generation and social wealth to pay reparations to fund Black liberation. And the word Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. And we say the slogan in unity with the Uhuru movement, which is led by the African People's Socialist Party, who are fighting for the liberation and self-determination of Black people in the US and around the world as one African people. Next slide. So I want to first take a moment to salute our leadership, the founder and leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the worldwide Uhuru movement, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So Chairman Omali Yeshitela has been fighting relentlessly for political and economic power in the hands of the African working class for over 50 years. So Uhuru, salute you, Chairman. And I also really want to salute Onazine Yeshitela, who's here with us as well in the audience, the Deputy Chair of the African People's Socialist Party and President of the African People's Education and Defense Fund and Black Star Industries. Uhuru, so yeah, we're just really honored to have our leadership in the building with us here in the Solidarity Center. Next slide. I also really want to salute Chairwoman Penny Hess, Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee and author of the book, Overturning the Culture of Violence. Chairwoman Penny. Chairwoman Penny has been fighting under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party since 1976. When Chairman Omali Yeshitela founded the African People's Solidarity Committee. And it's just an honor to have everybody here with us this evening. Next slide. So in tonight's program, we will be talking about how the Reparations Legacy Project is redistributing wealth to the programs of the Black Power Blueprint, and specifically this year to the Uhuru Wakulia African Women's Health Center, which is located in North St. Louis, and how you can redistribute your wealth as reparations that goes beyond philanthropy or charity. And we'll also be talking about the ways that you can be involved in this international campaign by contributing your skills and passion to build the Reparations Legacy Project. And we'll also be inviting you to attend the second annual Reparations Legacy Conference, which will be in November of this year. So I would like to start this evening off with a video that was created by one of our Reparations Legacy donors, Nick Davis. And this explains what the Reparations Legacy Project is. Enjoy.
I stand in solidarity with the right of African people to determine their own future and to have all of their stolen resources back in their hands.
The people must have power.
A small number of billionaires and millionaires have more wealth hoarded in their hands than the majority of the world's population. As white people, we constitute only 11% of the world's population, but we control and consume over 80% of the world's resources. There is something deeply wrong with this picture. Every single day, another black man, woman, or child is murdered by police or white nationalists. In the US, the prison population is majority African and indigenous, the largest prison population on planet Earth. Banks and corporations continue to profit to the tune of trillions, the stolen riches generated from the blood, sweat, and tears of African people, forced to labor and starve in the most brutal conditions, whether it's in Congo or in Chicago. This is the reality of colonialism, a system built on genocide and slavery. Under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, African people inside the US and around the world are building programs to reclaim power over their stolen resources and lives. Through sheer will and struggle in their own interests, they are paving the road towards a future without oppressor and oppressed. The Reparations Legacy Project is a challenge to all white people with access to social, financial, and generational wealth to pay reparations to the movement for African self-determination and black power, led by the African working class. The Reparations Legacy Project is a campaign of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the organization of white people working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and its founder, Chairman Amali Shatella, the revolutionary leader who made reparations a household word.
The question is, what stand do you take as it relates to this social system that has its foundation in slavery and genocide? Are you really interested in overturning this relationship?
Our job is to organize in the white community, to build the mass movement for reparations to African people. The future is in the hands of the oppressed. We can be a part of that future. Join the Reparations Legacy Project and make the leap beyond philanthropy, charity, and other false solutions that might make us feel good, but change nothing about who holds control over the resources of the world. Let's overturn the legacy of the slave master. We can make a commitment today that the next generation will inherit the legacy of reparations.
Is really just an incredible video. Every time I see it, I just get chills. Really want to salute Nick Davis for making that really brilliant video. So good. So without any further ado, it is my honor to introduce Penny Hess, the chairman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, who's worked under the leadership for over 45 years since the founding of APSC by Chairman Amali Shatella in 1976. Chairwoman Penny is also the author of Overturning the Culture of Violence and has spoken around the world to organize white people into the movement for reparations to African people. So please join me in welcoming Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Rue, I just really want to welcome everybody for for coming out tonight, and those who are online, and just really want to join Len in welcoming our comrades who have come from around the US to participate in a very intensive week of outreach and struggle and work under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. I want to join in welcoming Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Great honor to have the chairman with us here tonight. I want to reiterate what Len said, that I have the honor of being the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is the organization of white people that was formed by the African People's Socialist Party in 1976 as part of the strategy for the liberation of African people by sending white people as Black power and white face behind enemy lines into the white population to win other white people to take a stand for reparations, to understand the basis for the base. Thank you for the basis of how the world got to be the way it is right now, to see and to understand that this system that we live in is colonialism as a mode of production. This is formed by the assault, Europe's assault on Africa, the enslavement of African people, the trafficking of African human beings, stolen labor, stolen land, genocide against the indigenous people, and the colonization of the majority of the people on this planet Earth. And this is why Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee with the understanding and truly the belief that white people can listen to science too. And we can begin to see the world as it is experienced by African and other oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. In fact, we must do that if we want to be on the forward side of history. I want to also salute Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela, under whose leadership all of us in the solidarity movement work. Under her office, her leadership, she is the architect of the Black Power Blueprint and the more than 50 economic institutions of the African People's Socialist Party here throughout the US and throughout the world, and the growing movement for the liberation of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So it is a great honor. We'll be able to hear from Chairman Omali Yeshitela shortly, and it is always very electrifying to hear the chairman and to be able to open up to this incredible analysis that he is opening up to us. So we always start with the question when in these kind of events, what do we owe? When we talk about reparations, what do we owe? Well, I want to say that Chairman Omali Yeshitela explains that it is the colonial mode of production. So that means that there is nothing produced in this country or under this system that does not originate in the oppression and colonial domination and theft and plunder of other people, of African people, of Africa, and oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. It's deeper, as the chairman says, than just a concept of colonialism. It is not a policy. It is the essence of this system that we live in. And that it is not, as we learn in school, that the economy of America and Europe is basically good, except for a few bad stains on America's soul, as Biden said recently. But the reality is that, as the chairman has said, there wouldn't be an America without the enslavement of African people, without the genocide of the indigenous people. There couldn't be this. There couldn't be a Europe as it is known today without that. It is essential. And we have to understand that, because we are the colonizers. We are the ones that if we understand that colonialism as the mode of production, white people are the colonizers, African, indigenous, and others are the colonized. And this to me is extremely liberating. It's not racism, as the chairman said. It's not ideas in people's heads. It's a political and economic system that was created by human beings and that can be overturned by human beings. And it must be led by those who make up the pedestal upon which we sit, which is led by the African working class, organized for the liberation of African people and in the interest of all oppressed and colonized peoples and everybody that wants to go to a liberated world, a world without war, without suffering, without colonization of the majority of the people of the planet Earth for the benefit of the few. And so this is what the chairman is saying. We must take on and understand this concept, the colonial mode of production. It is also the basis for how we as white people see the world, how we see ourselves. It is the basis, as the chairman says, of our dreams and aspirations. And it is the ability on our part to be able to speak as the subjects of history, right? The subjects of history. Everything in the narrative of white people has white people in the center of it, has white people as the genius, the victor, the wonderful missionary, all of the stories that are told that uphold colonialism as the mode of production are the narrative of the colonizer. And it is our ability to be the subjects of our own history and to believe and perpetrate the lies that are put out and which are the narrative of the colonizer. And that there's another part of this dialectic, and that is that there is the narrative of the colonized. And from the point of view of the colonizer nation, the African, the indigenous, they are the objects of history, the ones that have no name, the invisible, the other as it's known. But what, as Chairman O'Malley Shatella has explained to us and shown, what is happening right now is that this system, this colonialism mode of production, is in a crisis because of the resistance and fight back and anti-colonial struggle of African people and oppressed and colonized people around the world. That is what is happening right now. It's in a crisis and it can't rule in the same old way. And what's happening in that, and the African People's Socialist Party has been on the ground for 50 years since 1972. And the chairman also was active and led organizations in the 1960s as well. So the chairman has come out of the period of the African Revolution of the 1960s and through all of the counterinsurgency and COINTELPRO and war against the African community in so many ways, and summed up and solved the problems of the African Revolution so that this time around, African people can win, and African people are winning. They are winning. And this is the world that we face today. And this is what we have to understand when we are looking at the question of reparations. And this is even why we know what the word reparations mean, because Chairman O'Malley Shatella in 1982 held the first tribunal on reparations to African people in Brooklyn, New York, at that time when nobody knew, nobody in the white community knew what reparations was. And the chairman's goal and the goal of the African People's Socialist Party was to make reparations a household word. And indeed, it is that today. It's something discussed on CNN and in New York Times and in Congress, US Congress. This is a household word. People know what reparations means, know what colonialism means. And this is the work of Chairman O'Malley Shatella. And one of the things that the chairman talks about is that the motive force for any society is to produce and reproduce real life. That's why society is there, to stay in existence, to prosper, to reproduce. But African people, the chairman has said, have been forced to produce and reproduce life for white people, not for themselves. And that is so profound. And if we're talking about reparations, we can start there. And chairman has said that African people have produced and reproduced real life for white people for the past 600 years, since the first Europeans left Portugal in 1415 to begin to assault Africa and steal the gold, steal the human beings, suddenly making Europe massively wealthy based on stolen wealth and stolen land and stolen resources from Africa, from the indigenous people, and from Asia, and from the Arab people from around the world. And, just to go into things, basically we owe everything. Everything is owed to African people. This land belongs to the indigenous people. That still is the reality today. But if we want to talk about some specific things, and I want to say how much, I just want to name a few things because we could talk all night about it, but I want to talk about a few things that have created massive wealth stolen from African people and benefiting the white population. One of these, one example, if we want to talk about the fact that African people have produced and reproduced real life for white people, start with this horrible thing, this industry that was part of the enslavement of African people that was called the breeding of African people. And they also call it the second trade in African people, the second slave trade. And it was where African women and men were forced to produce African babies as commodities, and African women especially were considered especially valuable commodities. And they were forced to produce babies, and those babies were sold. And, I've been looking at this book, and if you haven't seen it, you should take a look at it. It's called The American Slave Coast, A History of Slave Breeding Industry in the US. And that this is a narrative, this is an understanding and a true history that has come out in recent years as the part of the fight for the African narrative to come to the surface and be forced to be recognized by white people. But we are taught that the importation of kidnapped African people in the US ended in 1808. That meant that those who had slave ships could no longer go to Africa and legally, of course it did happen, but they couldn't legally bring African people on ships into the US. And by the way, it was 1808 when that happened, which was 4 years after African people in Haiti won their liberation. So there was, a lot of incentive to, with a fear that African people would be liberating themselves everywhere, which is ultimately the case. But then, we're taught that the importation of African people was ended, and then began the breeding of African women, the mass rape and violation of African women and men by the colonizer. But actually it was the other way around. The industry of, quote, breeding, of forming, of creating, taking commodities, this atrocity, this colonial atrocity of forcing African human beings to have babies and sell those babies as a commodity, and the parents and the family, and have the control, came first. And that was especially promoted by Thomas Jefferson, by the way. He was the main promoter of that. He said that he was the number one proponent of this form of hideous colonial violence against African people. And he himself owned 600 African people. And he said, I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man on the farm. What she produces is an addition to the capital while his labors disappear in mere consumption. And so this is one example. This is one example of, we don't even know how many billions and billions of dollars was created in that way, but there is the understanding that the enslavement of African people was a huge wealth generator. It was the wealth generator for the white population, for white people. And some of these statistics are from Bloomberg, by the way, and they're putting these numbers to it. And they're saying that the economic value of the 4 million enslaved African people in 1860 was on the average $1,000 per person, or about $4 billion total. And that amount was more than all the banks, all the railroads and factories in the US were worth at the time. And in today's dollars, this would come out to as much as $42 trillion. And that was, therefore, African people as commodities was the most lucrative, expensive commodity in that period. And that in spite of colonialism, in spite of the shift from chattel slavery as colonialism to direct colonialism of African people, which they experience today inside the borders of the United States, African people continue to vastly create wealth, attempt to create wealth under colonialism from the very beginning. And over and over and over again in this country, that wealth was violently stolen from them as soon as it was raised. And I think that, this is just one part of the wealth of the forced labor of African people that continues to, to build the wealth of the system. But right after the Civil War, as we know, in January 1st, 1865, William Tecumseh Sherman granted what they say 40 acres and a mule, which was called Field Order 15, which is actually 400,000 acres along the Atlantic coast, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. But and from what I have read, that was put out on January 1st, 1865. African people went there that day. They went there and claimed land. They began building. They started farming. They began building their houses and doing a number of different things. But that land was taken away from them in that very September by the U.S. government, by the next President Johnson, and that land today would have been worth $3.1 trillion. So that is wealth that African people don't have, but white people have. And by contrast, in 1862, the US government enacted the Homestead Acts, which was a series of laws meant to help, quote, settle the West, to colonize the West. The federal government distributed 270 million acres of land stolen from the indigenous people in the Midwest and West to white people. No Africans could have part of this, to settle this land. And according to Bloomberg, it's saying that an estimated 48 million Americans today, white people today, are descendants of those original, quote, homesteaders, are those who stole the land and benefit from that. And just as a statistic, 48 million is 20% of the white population today. So this is still in the wealth, in the social wealth faced by the white population. Stolen African wealth. Under Reconstruction, the US created something called the Freedmen's Bank. And the US bank's savings bank for African people, supposedly. And the white man who controlled it stole the money. African people in 9 years, within the 9 years after the end of enslavement. So in 1874, by then, African people had deposited in those dollars worth then $66 million into that bank. that is worth $2 billion today. And a white man stole it. He paid no price. He was never charged with that. You know, that is the story. That is the colonialism that exists today. And that over and over again, African people built wealth, built their own towns, built their own economies, built their own neighborhoods, and that so many, all of these situations were attacked by mobs, by white mobs like Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, where white mobs and the police burned down what was called the Black Wall Street, wiping out $200 million in homes and businesses and displacing 10,000 African people. That is never there. The city, or, you know, nobody has ever paid reparations for that. That is money in the white population now, in the social wealth of white people. And Tulsa wasn't an isolated incident. As we know, after the Civil War and well into the 20th century, there were at least 100 other examples of white mob attacks on African cities and neighborhoods throughout the US, like Rosewood, Florida, Ocoee, Florida. I know in every state this existed, in addition to some 5,000 to 10,000 acts of violence called lynching against African people. Also, local governments destroyed African communities, like here in St. Louis, such as Mill Creek Valley, where in the 1950s and earlier, there were 22,000 African people who lived there. They had hotels, they had jazz clubs, they even had colleges, universities, schools, churches, gas stations, homes, their own economy. And the mayor at the time brought the wrecking ball to the entire 450 acres that is Mill Creek Valley, a lot of which is where St. Louis University is, and other places, and some of it is still empty today. He did that clearly and as a stated reason to stop the competition of the African institutions with white businesses that he wanted to build up downtown. And, you know, even in today's world, in 2009, US banks targeted African people in the subprime mortgage. Wells Fargo, and if you haven't seen, you know, the documentaries on that or read about it, you have to read about it, because it was vicious that they used Black churches to bring in, you know, and promote the subprime mortgages, which they targeted the African community specifically for the subprime, calling it, you know, just anti-African names, just open viciousness. And out of that, around 2009, 350,000 African people's homes were taken away through subprime mortgages. They were targeted. It was, I can't even find how much wealth it is, but I've seen the statement that it was half the wealth of the African community was stolen from that time of 350,000 homes. And at the same time, the same period that we're talking about since 2009, the so-called crash, and it's no coincidence that in the same period, there are now in the United States 22.2 million millionaires, and mostly white working people. I'm not talking about the bourgeoisie, they're billionaires and trillionaires. This is white people, and most of them this has been in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all of it. Most of them have made millions of dollars off their houses. That's one of the ways that they became millionaires, because the skyrocketing cost of homes, purchasing homes. So this is what colonialism is. In South Africa or any other place in the world, white people go specifically to steal the diamonds, the oil, the land, the gold, the coltan. But colonialism is right here in front of our eyes. It is right here inside the US. They just try to disguise it with other, with everything from people of color to, which is insane, to racism, to, to anything but saying that this is a political and economic sucking of the blood of African people and indigenous people who have nationalities, identities, and for the benefit of the white population. This is colonialism. It buys our houses, it sends our children to college, and this is why, as we will see, the African People's Socialist Party is leading a struggle, fighting for power, fighting for the liberation of Africa, fighting for the end of this vicious system that can only exist through the suffering and theft and plunder and rape of the majority of the people on the planet. This has to go. It is destroying the planet itself. And to raise reparations to African people is to return the stolen wealth and to win solidarity from white people to see our interests, in the interest of the African working class and the people on the planet Earth, to end our self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world, to end our relationship to being part of the policemen of the world or the soldiers of this planet. It's gotta go. It's gotta go. The planet itself is in danger as one trajectory of colonialism from the first day that white people stepped onto Africa and assaulted Africa. That began the destruction of the environment. It all goes together. And the only answer is the liberation of Africa and African people. So what is owed? Everything is owed. Everything is owed. We owe reparations, but this is the future of this planet. And it's something that we have to win, we have to define, and we have to say that, if you're here, that we open our eyes to what the conditions are, what the reality is as colonialism inside this country, and the right of African people to be free and liberated as the future of this planet. So I just want to say unity through reparations. Uhuru.
Wow, Uhuru, Chairman Penny, that was really just an amazing, very insightful presentation. Let's just give it up again for Chairman Penny. Yeah, so I just really appreciate the summation of all those very, very revolting statistics. And we really do, as white people, have to open our eyes to colonialism in this country. So thank you for that. So I don't really want to prolong this anymore, but I do want to, now it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker and the visionary revolutionary leader, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is the founder of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International. He is the acknowledged leader of the African nation. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has given the world the science of African internationalism. And that proves that it was the assault on Africa, the sale of African human beings, and the colonial theft of African labor, resources, land, and genius that built the wealth and power of the capitalist system and the pedestal upon which we all white people continue to benefit from today. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has built an incredible on-the-ground organization led by the African working class around the world and created the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976 to send white people behind enemy lines into the white community to build white solidarity with Black power and reparations. Like many, if not all of you here today, I was really just sold straightforward on the logical truth of African internationalism, and I continue to be inspired to action by the words of the chairman on a daily basis. So it's my true honor to introduce our revolutionary leader, Uhuru Kenyatta.
Uhuru. First of all, I'd like to really thank Comrade Lynn for the introduction and extend my appreciation to the leadership of the African People's Solidarity Committee, USM, and to all of you for coming here on today. This is a really important meeting. And an important process that we are engaged in and have been engaged in for a while now. This is extraordinarily critical moment in history. And you don't have to be especially clever to see that. You can't go to social media, turn on your television, et cetera, and not see that. And this crisis is profound. It is deep. And that's something that we have a grip on. That is to say, in the African People's Socialist Party. I really appreciate, and one can never get tired of, one can never be unimpressed by the kind of research and data that we hear coming from Comrade Penny Hess, from the Solidarity Movement, et cetera. That's really good. That's really extremely, extremely important. And I think it's extremely important for white people, for colonizers to hear that kind of stuff. We live with it every damn day without even knowing any of these numbers that's being talked about. And to quote, to coin a phrase, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. You're too young. You even grasp that. But the point that I would make is that this is important work that you're doing. I'm so really proud of your presence and your participation in this movement. I've been working, as it's been said, for 50 years dealing with this. And 40 some odd years we created the African People's Solidarity Committee. And the African People's Solidarity Committee was experienced by the so-called left in this country as freaks and odd forces and this ridiculous notion of white people working under the leadership of Black people, et cetera. And you would not believe some of the slander that came with that. This is from white communists, the white left, et cetera. You hear them today in some instances, I'm sure. I know that I hear them every now and then today. So this is really important. And Comrade Penny Hess and the African People's Solidarity Committee took on a marvelous position. And now what is happening is we were able and continue to be able to predict the victory of the colonized peoples of the world. We can predict victory and the overturning of a social system that's based on robbing, looting, genocide, even the destruction of the planet Earth itself, that people call capitalism. And I love that because many of the people who talk about hating capitalism and loving Karl Marx, who is recognized as one of the most significant proponents of scientific socialism or capitalism, on the one hand, would ignore, as did Marx himself, the significance of the statement by Marx that this system that's called capitalism required as a pedestal. He said what we referred to as wage slavery in Europe. And even this concept of wage slavery, this thing that's called wage slavery in Europe, this whole process of capitalist production required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. Wage slavery. When he says wage slavery, he's talking about how capitalism articulated itself for white people. He didn't say white people, he said Europe. Required as a pedestal, slavery pure and simple in the New World. It required Portugal to do what it did. It required what has been discussed. When we talk about how badly Africans have been treated in the United States and Haiti, et cetera, but the fact is that Europe attacked Africa. I'm here today because Europe attacked Africa and initiated this entire process of production, this capitalist social system. And when I say this system, I'm talking about a system as a mode of production. People finally are being forced to recognize the existence of colonialism because we've been pushing it now for 50 years or so, where people wanted to define the conditions of African people that we are suffering from as being racism that puts white people in the center. Somehow what we are fighting for is to make white people like us. That's what the struggle is about, to liquidate the political and economic question altogether. It's about racism, we're told. And of course, what that does again is places white people in the center. And it liquidates the fact that there are objectives, real concrete material objectives that we can fight for. How can we find allies in the world going around saying what we need your support with is to help us make white people like us? That's the most asinine thing in the world. But the fact is that white people owe your definition, your existence as white people, to colonialism. Was no such thing as white people. Was no such thing as Europe. When people set out from Portugal and attacked Africa and initiated this entire process, even the consciousness of the peoples of the world, this consciousness has been influenced by this emergence of a mode of production. Mode of production, which we define as an economic basis of society and a superstructure, the institutions, the ideas, etc., that stems from this mode of production. People say, well, you call it racist. No, I'm not talking about racism. It's a Black person who did. How can you call it racism? I'm not talking about racism. I'm talking about a mode of production that's based on parasitism. It's a parasitic relationship that Europe has to the rest of the world. There's no other explanation for it. You can't explain otherwise why African people in the United States has a lifespan from 6 or more years less than white people. What explanation can you have for that? How can you watch an Olympics on the one hand and then say that it's reasonable, rational, makes sense for African people to live 6, 7 years less than white people? That's in the United States. But if you look at places in Africa where you have a situation, lifespan in Sierra Leone, something like 37 years old. Africa is rich in terms of natural resources. The entire so-called industrial world today relies on what they can steal from Africa and what they have stolen from Africa, which includes me. And so we're talking about consciousness arising from this. The whole concept of whiteness, that people are ready to fight and die for, that people are all organizing all around this country to die for, that people attacked the Capitol on January 6th to fight for, to overthrow the government for. And that Biden, because people like to talk about this so-called irrational, as they would characterize it, how do they put it, replacement theory. And so they get a killer, 18-year-old murderer, who goes to a store in Buffalo and kills 10 Africans. And they say he's influenced by this irrational replacement theory. But the fact is that every year in Munich, Germany, there's a huge meeting. Hundreds of people in government. Zuckerberg, one of them, Zuckerberg, the guy who owns Facebook, one of them, the guy who put us in Facebook jail, the guy who says that you can't say anything about white power and stay online, right? He's there. Prime ministers are there. People in government. This is the Munich Security Council. You can look it up yourself. Google it. And in 2020, they had this serious discussion revolving around, and this is what they said, not some 18-year-old stupid white guy in Texas, but this is what the Zuckerbergs, this is what people who are in government around the world, European world, they said they are fearful of what? A state of restlessness. Restlessness. What is that except the replacement theory coming from them? And when they talk about the West, they're clear. They're not just talking about Europe and North America, they are talking about that, but they are also including Australia. How the hell does that happen? New Zealand, they're talking about the colonizers. They're talking about a colonial mode of production that came into existence at my expense and your expense too. because this is the basis of all the relationships that exist in the world, but because it also creates the ideas, the ideological foundation, ideological basis of this whole colonial mode of production. That's something that you all have to contend with. The system, you talk about going to court, well, you must have done something. To be arrested, you must have done something. And what you did was be born colonized, born into a colonial mode of production. It sucks all the resources, the freedom, everything. And it's humiliation for Black people, for the indigenous people every day of our lives. I remember going, first time I traveled to Southern California, and many years ago. And they were televising this, how all these white people had come to the border, San Isidro, to the border. They brought their lawn chairs and binoculars and what have you to watch the aliens come across, to watch the illegal aliens come across. How the hell do the indigenous people get to be illegal aliens? How the hell do these white people who are not indigenous at all to this land, right, get to determine that those folk who are coming to their own land, who've been pushed out of their own land, are some kind of illegal aliens? How do they determine what's legal and what's not legal? The fact is they're able to do that because they're coming along with this as a thing called the state. You hear it now more and more than you've ever heard in your life, especially since the Trump administration has been there. You hear this discussion of the so-called deep state, the deep state. And I don't know, you can find stuff I've been writing about this for ages. But the deep state is finally recognition. There is this entity called the state. And when I say the state, I'm not talking about this land that was stolen from the indigenous people here. I'm not talking about the deal that Thomas Jefferson made with France after the Haitian Revolution that turned all of this land over with the people, with the indigenous people, so that Jefferson could extend the slavery. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this state, which is an institution of coercion, which is institution of bureaucracy with serious forms of coercion built into it, like the prisons, the court system, like things like the FBI, CIA, the police department. All of this is a part of the state. It's a colonial state. It is a state that was formed, that was created to deal essentially with the other. The colonial state was created to deal with the other. It's not to say that it didn't do bad things to white people, but I'm saying its foundation was to deal with the other. It came about as a consequence of the process of killing the indigenous people here, of capturing African people who were enslaved, holding us in forms of slavery, fighting with other folk for lands in this area that we refer to as the Americas. This is the thing that consolidated this entity that's called a state, and also the emergence of Europe. So I just wanted to say that. I think it's really important because, and I think you are important. I've been looking for you now. I've been working for you now for 50 years or so, certainly for 40 some odd years, when even, as I mentioned, groups of white people said this was impossible to do. And, but we had to recognize, had to believe that white people are people. And despite everything that's being done by white people to defy that recognition, white people are people. And if you can't get to that, you can't come up with a scientific assessment, analysis. And if white people are people and I'm a people, you know, and then we understand that, as we said, as Comet Penny mentioned earlier, that the primary motive force of society is what? Is to produce and reproduce life. It is not your religion. It is not some other stuff like that. It is produce and reproduce life. Religion, culture, all of that stuff comes about as a part of the process to produce life. And so we have a situation where in the production of life itself is something that is parasitic. You have the emergence of a parasite, and a parasite has to live off a host. And there is no way in hell that you can convince a parasite logically, if it were possible to communicate with some of the parasites you're familiar with, like tapeworms and ticks and stuff like that. You can't talk them out of it. You can't say, wow, you're being naughty, stop, stop, stop. You can't show them the evidence of what they're doing to other people to get them to stop, because if they stop, they die. And if America doesn't do what it does, if Europe doesn't do what it does, it dies. You know that's the truth, because all you got to do is look around you right now, and you see the trouble that a colonial mode of production is creating in the white world. I mean, Macron's going to be looking for a job soon in France. And already this guy, Boris Johnson in England, looking for a job soon. Probably can't even explain what the hell is happening to them. You know? The Prime Minister of Italy trying to resign. And the president won't let him resign because they don't know what the hell they're going to do if he does resign. Contradiction's still going to be there. They don't have any answers. We do. That's the advantage that we have. That's the significance of our being here today. So I really appreciate this presentation that's been made by Comrade Penny and all of the incredible work that's been done that you do around the issues of reparations. I want to just say a couple of things about that. My job is to lead a revolution to free Black people. That's my job. And part of what I've come to understand is that there's so many contradictions that are out there that a genuine revolutionary party has to be able to deal with. The contradiction, for example, that between the colonizer and the colonized. I do not take it for granted that all of the colonizers have to be on the side of colonialism. I can't take that for granted. For one thing, the truth of the matter is, increasingly every day you look and you see that the colonial mode of production is in trouble. You can't go to a supermarket, the shelves are increasingly empty. You can't afford gasoline. The petroleum that's coming from Africa and other places is harder and harder to get, which creates its own contradictions in life, which is responsible for Italy and responsible for Spain and responsible for what Brexit. All these things are a consequence of contradictions within the colonial mode of production. That's where it comes from. And so that's the thing that we are contending with. So we understand this, and because we understand what's caused it, then we know what can stop it. We know what can stop it. Karl Marx said, again, that wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. Logically then, because he was talking about having to destroy capitalism, logically he would have said, therefore, what we have to do is kick this pedestal out from under it and boom, problem solved. But he doesn't. He comes up with some non sequitur. Wage slavery in Europe requires as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. Therefore, the non sequitur is that the industrial white working class has to organize to overthrow the white ruling class, both of whom rest on this pedestal of our oppression. So you don't get any solution. You get what appears to be a solution, what has been characterized as class struggle in Europe and North America, essentially in the Americas, has, generally speaking, been contests between sectors of the colonizers for more of the loot from colonialism. And sometimes they call themselves workers or not. That's what January 6th is all about. That's what Brexit is all about. Who's going to get the resources? They call it class struggle. But you're talking about law that has its origin in empire, in colonialism, the colonial mode of production. And so one thing that has happened in the process of creating what is now Europe, Europeans, white people, et cetera, that's really interesting, is again, this superstructure, the legal systems et cetera, being a part of the superstructure that we're looking at. And the thing is, the state legalizes itself. It legalizes itself. Slavery was legal. And break the law by putting me in slavery. Oh, and what they do at the moment, they've come into a conflict with the democracy that Europe is supposed to be about, that's supposed to be spreading around the world. When they come into a conflict, where they come with an exception, a legal exceptionalism. It's been referred to sometimes in philosophy, people who are writing about this stuff. And after all, the reality is that Europe is involved in civilizing the rest of us, bringing us up to the European standards. So you can have an exception. The law says thus, 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 but it even makes the assumption. They call this something like a democratic imperialism or something to that effect. You have this situation where there's a presumption that people govern with their consent. You've read people like Locke and John Locke and all these other, the consent of the governed. They tell you about social contract. You read about that and learned that in high school and junior high school and things like that. On the one hand, so people are governed by their consent according to basic principles that they feed us, on the one hand. But then they make exceptions to that. How do you explain holding all those African people who are enslaved in this country? How do you explain what England is doing? People are consenting to be enslaved, to be tortured, to have their children kidnapped and murdered and maimed. That's no consent. So how do you explain this? But there's a way. It's like a legal exceptionalism. And so, because the fundamental thing about the empire, about colonialism, is that it explains what it's doing to the world as something as bringing the savages up to the standards of civilization of white people. You think I'm making it up? That's how Rudyard Kipling, you remember Rudyard Kipling's infamous declaration about how, what Europeans were doing in terms of colonialism was taking up the white man's burden. Saying, we don't want to go and kill everybody and rob and rape and dominate them, but it's the white man's burden. We are spreading civilization and Christianity and what have you. And so it was permissible under these terms because the objective is to bring people who are not quite civilized, for whom law and democracy doesn't mean anything. And that was even in the United Nations and the League of Nations in the 1920s. That when you talk about self-determination for whom? For the civilized nations. So that somebody in Africa or some other place that talked about being self-determining, you had to prove to be a civilized group. Because the white man's burden was to civilize us all. Remember, some of you, you're too young to remember it, but I remember how during the murderous campaign that was waged against the people in Vietnam, the occasion where they had said that we had to destroy the village to save it. And this is a kind of logic. And so, and I'm not making this, some stuff is so clear. Like the United States, they have a constitution. That's my man there, the major. They have a constitution that prohibits double jeopardy. You've heard that, right? It's illegal. Double jeopardy is prohibited by the Constitution on the one hand. But then they have designer laws created for African people, created for indigenous people, certainly for African people. That says, you've heard the law, 3 strikes and you're out. How do you get 3 strikes? How the hell is that? How do you get 2 strikes? If double jeopardy is trying somebody more than once for the same thing, is illegal, how the hell do you get to 3 strikes? And of course, it plays to a white audience that lives in a state of terror and fear, because it recognizes, at least it is instinctively understand there's something rotten and wrong with the relationship that white people have with African people, with Black people. And one would think it was we who were doing the lynchings and brutalizing white people, etc. One would think it was we. And white people proclaim all this fear of Black people, Black young people, Black any kind of person. It's a part of a superstructure. I wanted to mention that. But the world is fast changing. And we took on the question of reparations for a few reasons. Because the fact of the matter is that there is going to be any resolution of this question within the context of the existing social system. For us, the question of reparations is a means by which we negate colonialism. We negate the colonial mode of production. We offer people who are colonizers an opportunity to engage in genuine class struggle. Because that stuff y'all been doing ain't class struggle. The class question is concentrated in the colonial question. It's colonialism. That's why you see this easy ability to jump on this bad, Bernie Sanders, you're gonna get $15 an hour over a number of years. What kind of socialism is this? This socialism. It doesn't even challenge the existing social system itself. And there's never gonna be any freedom like that. But when we say reparations, and the reparations issue was extremely important to us. We, as Comrade Penny said, I determined that to make reparations a household work. Everybody's gonna know about reparations. And that's why in 1982, we held the first World Tribunal on Reparations for Black people in the United States. We did that in 1982, and that's important. And one thing that makes it important is because it's part of one single historical continuum. I'm the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, a revolutionary organization that took it upon ourselves to complete the Black Revolution of the 1960s, revolution that Che Guevara was involved in, the revolution that the Vietnamese people were pursuing, the revolution that China promoted under the leadership of Mao Zedong, the revolution that people in places like Algeria were engaged in, the revolution that people who were in what is characterized as the Middle East today were trying to make to free ourselves. We wanted to make this revolution, complete this revolution, to have complete liberation of Africa and African people around the world. That's why we did it. But we were under the influence of this whole logic, this whole narrative that was promoted, and especially going into the 1980s, that somehow white people were getting really tired. What did they call it? Some form of donor exhaustion, et cetera, that having to give so much to Black people, et cetera, that this was really tiring us out and spreading all kinds of garbage that somehow Black people were living off the welfare of hard-working white people. That's one of the reasons the whole concept of, you hear now politically, you hardly hear a politician talking about the working class. They talk about the middle class, or if they say something about the working class, they say something, how do they put it? Some working class that's distinct because they actually do something. And they're distinguishing that from African people. And so this whole notion that Black people are some kind of drags on the economy, this was something. Ronald Wilson Reagan, who was president, who was the Donald Trump of his era, put forth this notion that somehow Black people were welfare queens and that we were just living off the generosity of white people. And that's still embedded in the politic that you will hear today. And I listen to it on the radio every day, right now. So that was the notion. And African people were affected by this too, demoralized by this. Just think about this every day. What do you think the indigenous people, the Mexican people, They watching the same TV that I was looking at when I was in California, and all the white people come to watch the so-called illegal aliens come across the border. What a humiliating experience that must be on their own land, right? On a land where I would see Mexicans who would go into the hills where they were sleeping in caves at night, taking plastic bags of groceries up there with them on their own land, after working on farms on their land owned by white people. This is the relationship we're talking about. It's not something that's viable. So this is the social system that we engaged in. This is the consciousness. And so African people were also affected by the stuff every day you hear, you look up, every day you hear that somehow we come some kind of social, some kind of economic, some kind of moral burden, drag on this good white community, white society, et cetera. So we say reparations, drive the reparations question home. Well, everybody say reparate, all the black people, don't care what your class aspirations or station is in life, say reparations, say reparations. And the thing is, because once you say reparations, then you gotta say why. If you say why, then you begin to expose the real relationship that exists between African people and white people, and you learn that it is not African people who've lived off the welfare of white people, but white people have lived off the welfare of African people for more than 400 years. And this becomes a part of the consciousness that makes people capable of standing up and resisting the conditions that we suffer from, as opposed to accepting the narrative that's imposed on us every day of our lives, right? So that was one of the reasons it was important. And we have a different viewpoint of this whole reparation question than most of the people, African middle class, petty bourgeois, because who now that we threw our bodies on the bomb, on the grenade, everybody can talk about reparations, right? When we start talking about reparations, they're white leftists were saying that it was a lunatic fringe to talk about reparation, out of your mind, et cetera. But now everybody can talk about reparations, and there are sectors in the African population. They talk about reparations. They assume that reparations is something that they can win to get a better piece of the action in this country. We're saying that reparations has to be something that responds to the fact that it negates the social system itself. We want white people to engage in reparations. Our position is that, as opposed to what was being done and is being done in most instances around the reparations questions, generally speaking, where people are trying to get the president to say that he's going to give reparations of an executive order, or to get Congress to pass some reparations issue, bill, or something to that effect. Okay, do that if you want to, but we know that the real reparations issue, the real capacity for reparations is in the people. First of all, in Black people. Because the truth of the matter is, at the moment that an African becomes conscious of what has been taken from us, recognizes that on north side of the Delmar, the reason there's no food in the refrigerator for my children because it's in somebody's refrigerator on the south of Delmar. People will go get their food, even if it is illegal. People will get their food. And so masses of African people have to conclude that reparation is a just demand. It's a just demand, one. Two, you have to come to that conclusion. Masses of the colonizers who hate the system. And I know you hate the system because I hear you talking about it all the time. I just saw something, I think in the New York Times, that said the majority of so-called voters, the American voters, the majority say that the system cannot serve them, does not serve. That's the majority. And the so-called left can't deal with it because it confines its struggle to either the Democrats or the Republican colonizer. The Democratic colonizer, Republican colonizer, and sometimes some other left colonizer who I'm not going to mention. But that's where they go to. They can't solve anything, but the people want real solutions, and the people can hear you. When you tell them what the contradiction is and what has been, they can hear you. They can hear you. They can hear you now, even if they weren't able to hear you 2 months ago, 3 months ago. They can hear you now. That's what I know. That's what you're experiencing in the world today. And so that's really powerful. I want to say just one thing, that what you do is so important, and you do it extraordinarily well. And in the process, you are creating cadre, soldiers, who are committed to overturning the system and doing what you can do. This whole reparation, I know that you had to swim upstream to get here. Mothers disagreed with, the lovers disagreed with, and all this stuff, but you made this trip anyway. And building organization. We've been building organization. That means that we assume responsibility ourselves. We assume responsibility ourselves to make it happen. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm struggling for. That's what a revolutionary party is all about. You are part of that party. You are instruments of this party. You are instruments of this party. And some people may be uncomfortable with that, and if so, I'll understand if you slink out. I won't say slink, yeah. But that's what you are. I thought about you 45 years ago. This is the only way that we can end this isolation that white people have, this dehumanizing isolation, this bestialization that has occurred under this social system that would have you characterizing everybody else in the world, and it's so ridiculous. This whole notion of the supremacy of white people, and you know better. Only time you feel supreme is when you're looking at me. But when you go and look at the mirror, so, and then my job, and this is the tough job. It's my job, because I have to work among the colonizers. And working among the colonized, I'm working against the police, I'm working against the state, I'm working against the conditions imposed on my community. I don't know how many of you have ever visited or spent any time as one example in North St. Louis. It looks like a bombed out situation. Just think about it. People and their children waking up every morning, walking that street. What kind of aspiration do they have the guts to have under those circumstances? What can they think of themselves? What can they think of their parents under those circumstances? This is what I'm having to deal with on a regular basis. Because for them to believe what the white man says, for them to believe what the colonized says, it initiates a form of insanity. To have somebody enslaved and then accepting the narrative coming from the colonizer as the basis for accepting that. So it's hard work. And I have to build a revolutionary organization, revolutionary cadre. And I'm working all the time to make that happen. And I'm in the streets. I'm in the streets in St. Louis. Now, I head an international organization, believe it or not, with different organizations on the continent of Africa and Europe, throughout the United States, what have you. But I'm walking the streets every morning, knocking on doors and carrying propaganda to among the African working people in this city. I'm struggling, doing everything to build a revolutionary party, organization of African workers. And people are in the party now are not going to last. But this party has to come into existence, because as significant as the work you do is, the real work is going to have to come from the masses of African working class to take back our own power. I want to say that, and finally, I want to say something that I was asked to say. And part of that is, Comrade Pinnon was saying that, if you just look at quantifying this stuff, there's no way you can pay it back. But what you can do is you can unite with this theory that we're talking about, with this understanding, with African internationalism. And then it should inform you, it should give you
the courage. It should give you the arrogance to know that we can turn it over, we can build a new world. That's what we're fighting for, a new world. So it's a world without slaves and slave masters and bosses and workers and what have you, a new world. That's what we're fighting for. And we are now looking at and defining the road to get there. But one thing we know for sure, road socialism is painted black, you understand? And we're calling on you to double down. And I just wanted to again express my appreciation for you, for the incredible work that's being done by the Solidarity Movement. And I wanted to introduce you also to comment on Zanae Shatella. Would you stand up? You've heard her spoken of, and you will often, because she is the person who has assumed leadership over all of the economic institutions. And she has brought not just the leadership of the institution, she has brought also art to it. She's brought a style of work to it. Relentlessness is what we like to refer to the 50-year struggle that we have been involved in, and there's no place that's embodied more than in Zanae Shatella, who is the one who is primarily responsible for all these institutions that you see, Black Power Blueprint, the doula that we're talking about raising money for. This comrade is the person who is primarily responsible for that. And in relationship to that, I just want to say this one other thing, that it is also a statement of the significance that our party sees in the leadership of African women. And I don't say this in some kind of shallow way. If you go back, and it's not something we just discovered, you go back and look at the party's 14-point working platform that I think in 1979, we created that in point number 9. It talks about the significance of African women, the special oppression of African women, and how African women have to be equal partners in the making and shaping of human history to provide the leadership for this revolutionary struggle. So that's why she's here. That's why she's doing that, because our party believes that. And that's why there's a doula, the leadership of African women. I mean, that's why there's a doula. That's why there's a women's health center that's critical to the economic development that we're doing here. The leadership of African women would see that, would recognize that, would prioritize that, would put it first on the agenda. That's what makes us a complete revolutionary organization. Thank you, comrades. Uhuru.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you, comrade.
That was really just really excellent. And Deputy Chair, thank you so much for all of the work that you do, and thank you for your leadership. So this is the part of the program where everybody here, all of you all, will learn how you can be a part of this revolutionary movement for reparations. And first, I do want to just take a minute to say where people are tuning from on Zoom, because we also have a Zoom thing going on. So we have some people tuning in from the Bronx. We have some people tuning in from Manhattan. We have some people tuning in from Louisville, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Buffalo, New York, Seattle, Colorado, South Fulton, Georgia, San Diego, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. So thanks, everybody. So yeah, it's really just so great to have so many people from around the US tuning in right now for reparations. This is really just amazing. So this is part of our future. So so as we said, the Reparations Legacy Project is part of the strategy under the leadership of the Uhuru movement to negate the colonial mode of production and build genuine political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is solidarity. It is not charity. And when you contribute reparations to this program, It is a stand of material solidarity with African people's right to reclaim the entirety of what has been stolen from them. And it is not charity or philanthropy that keeps the power and resources in the hands of white people. When you contribute resources to this program, you are doing more than just making a donation. You're making a political statement that you unite with the right of African people to define what reparations looks like on their own terms. And we are not setting the terms. This is what distinguishes the Reparations Legacy Project from other organizations. Next slide. Also want to welcome up Chair Jesse Neville, Chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement.
Uhuru, Uhuru, everybody. Uhuru. Unity through
Reparations.
I get to take this off for a second. Well, I want to just, can we have another round of applause for Chairman Omali? I want to join in saluting Chairwoman Penny Hess for that very, very profound statement. As well as absolutely unite with the chairman's summation of Deputy Chair Onozine Yeshatela. Just express how honored we are to have the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, our leadership here in the Uhuru Solidarity Center, which, as Len mentioned earlier, is owned by the party, owned by Black Star Industries, and is the Black Power blueprint on the South Side. So it's an incredible honor to be here. And I also want to appreciate Len, the Reparations Legacy Project coordinator, and thank and welcome everybody who's here, everybody who's tuning in online. And I'll be joining Len to talk about how you can be a part of this. And as Len was just explaining, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about solidarity, not charity. And both Chairman Omali Yeshatela and in the presentation by Chairwoman Penny Hess, we heard about the chairman's understanding of this thing called the colonial mode of production. And the Black Power blueprint, when you contribute reparations to the Black Power blueprint, when you join the Reparations Legacy Project, as the chairman has said, even in the last couple of days, you are part of the negation of the colonial mode of production.
Yes.
But as the chairman said just yesterday, I believe it was, it is more than just saying no to the colonial mode of production. It is more than just saying no to everything that we detest about the way the world is today. It's about saying yes to the future, no to the past, yes to the future. That's what the Reparations Legacy Project represents. It's saying yes, it's saying no to a system built on slavery and oppression and colonialism, and yes to the emergence of the new world that the chairman just spoke of, a world where all human beings have self-determination based on the liberation and self-determination of African people. So this is what this is about. And Uhuru, next slide.
Thanks, Jesse.
So the Reparations Legacy Project, and many of the people joining us here are familiar with the Reparations Legacy Project. Some were meeting for the first time. And the Reparations Legacy Project actually had its founding conference last year after the African People's Socialist Party called for the Solidarity Movement to create this campaign to win white people with access to wealth, to fund the Black Power blueprint as a stand of concrete reparations. And last year, our focus was on raising the funds, raising reparations for the construction of the basketball court, which had a goal of, which had a total cost of $150,465. And we want to thank all of the Reparations Legacy donors who stepped forward to make this happen. And here are some photos. It is happening. Here are some photos of the Black Power Vanguard's basketball court, which is nearing completion as we speak. These aren't even the latest photos. We saw this. We had the honor to be on a Black Power Blueprint tour a few days ago, and the lights are installed and so much more. I mean, it is really coming to life very fast, as with everything that the Black Power Blueprint does, moving with the urgency of the African working class. So as Deputy Chair Onozine Yeshatela has said, this is more than a basketball court. It is rebuilding the community, and it is happening. It is happening in real time. Next slide. And this year, the African People's Socialist Party has tasked the Reparations Legacy Project with raising the resources and reparations needed for the construction of the Uhuru Wakulia African Women's Health Center and Doula Training Project. So we'd like to take a moment to show you a brief video outlining the colonial conditions that affect the African community in the area of infant and maternal mortality within this colonial mode of production, and how the African Women's Health Center will work to overturn these conditions through power in the hands of the African working class. So we're going to take a look at this brief video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how you can be a part of this.
Each year, the number of babies that die during childbirth in St. Louis could populate 15 kindergarten classrooms. Imagine all that potential lost. Each neighbor, family member, or friend who loses a baby faces enormous emotional suffering. The Black community in St. Louis suffers from an infant mortality rate 3.3 times that of white people. A 2019 study found that Black women in St. Louis County were nearly twice as likely to die while pregnant or after giving birth compared to white women. In a city that is home to some of the best medical care in the country, African women often lack access to prenatal and postnatal care. We recognize these grave disparities to be a symptom of an unjust system in which our power and self-determination has been taken from us. But with the Black Power Blueprint, we are fighting to take back our power over our own communities and resources, including the futures of our children. We are embarking on Phase 5 of the Black Power Blueprint, a Black-led wellness education center to empower Black women and girls in caring for our physical, mental, and emotional wellness. The vision is to provide health and self-care programs that reinforce our traditional African culture and invest in the future of our community, with doula and childbirth educator certification programs, along with opportunities for employment and entrepreneurship. The African Women's Health Program is specifically designed to alleviate the trauma women and children face in our communities due to lack of healthcare and ability to control our healthcare choices. Traditionally, the Black community values collective prosperity, a value we trace back to Africa. The African Women's Health Program addresses the mental and physical health of Black girls and women by providing prenatal, birthing, and postnatal care, trauma-informed yoga, an annual African Girls' Day event, a medicinal herb treatment program, and more. Following the murder of Mike Brown in 2014, the Uhuru movement created the Black Power Blueprint in North St. Louis to go beyond protest and provide solutions to the deep poverty, racial trauma, poor health, unemployment, and lack of housing and healthy food our community experiences. The Black Power Blueprint is a comprehensive neighborhood revitalization project that is transforming North St. Louis through renovation, self-sustaining economic development, and political power by and for the Black community. We have long recognized that our community has the capacity to solve our own problems through self-reliance projects driven by the needs of the community rather than having solutions imposed on us. We create programs that empower the people from the ground up to create lasting change. The African Women's Health Center will be a much-needed respite for our community. It will empower us in taking charge of our health and well-being. Support this innovative and empowering program. Donate today.
Just really appreciate that powerful video and what it represents, the vision of the Uhuru wa Kulia, which means freedom to nurture, African Women's Health Center. And we want to acknowledge the fact that many donors have already contributed towards the costs of this project. We can go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so the total cost for this project is $420,000. 420, am I saying that right? $420,000. Sorry, my brain is like, it's actually not that much money for the white community. And we've talked about, I mean, Chairwoman Penny laid out these statistics about all the wealth that has been robbed systematically from African people historically. And the fact that today, the average white household has a median assets of $900,000 in the United States, which is more than twice the cost of what the Uhuru Wakalia African Women's Health Center needs to raise to begin construction. So this shows you colonialism. This shows you that white people have access to this wealth based on this colonial mode of production. We have social wealth. We have generational wealth. We have access to wealth, and it's not our wealth, it's African people's wealth. So this is a call to turn over those resources, to redistribute that wealth as a stand of reparations to African people. And many people have already done that. In fact, donors have contributed over a little over $135,921. So let's give a round of applause for that. Towards the overall goal needed to make this health center a reality, the land has been acquired. And there is now a beautiful coming soon sign announcing the construction of this building. And if the city had land and there was a coming soon sign, or one of these aldermen had a coming soon sign for some project they claimed they were going to be building, you know that that sign would get sun faded and you'd see it a year from now and a year from now and a year from now, and the weeds would grow around it. But that coming soon sign is not going to be there for very long, because this project is going to happen, just like everything else that the Black Power Blueprint has done. And we have to make a commitment to do everything we have to do as the Reparations Legacy Project to ensure that $285,079 will not stand in the way of the Black Power Blueprint being able to begin construction immediately on the Uhuru Wakalia African Women's Health Center. So that is why our commitment is to raise the remaining $285,079 no later than the time of our Reparations Legacy Conference on November 12th. And that's in a few months from now. But honestly, let's get it done this month. Let's get it done before the end of July. Let's do everything we can to bring in these resources, because we know there are white people, maybe in this room, maybe on Zoom, who could contribute $285,079 and get this project funded. Or maybe you know someone who might be interested in doing that. Maybe you have a family member who might be interested in doing that, or someone you work with, or someone you know, or an old friend. Well, if the answer to that question is yes, you do, the Reparations Legacy Project is here to work with you on how to approach that person and win them to pay reparations to this program, the Black Power Blueprint. But we'll get to a little bit more about that in just a second. So our commitment is to raise these resources, as I said, by November 12th. And there are two ways. So we're making a call to everyone here to pay reparations to the Uhuru Wakalia African Women's Health Center. And many people already have, and we'll say something more about that in a moment. But there are two ways you can do this. The Reparations Legacy Project has two levels. One is by becoming what's called a Reparations Legacy donor. And then the second level is by becoming what we call a Reparations Legacy advocate. So if you go to the next slide.
Thank you. So you can become a Reparations Legacy donor by making a financial commitment of $5,000 or more. And if 57 people became a Reparations Legacy donor today by contributing at least $5,000, the health center could begin construction. So if you want to become a Reparations Legacy donor, stand on the right side of history. Now is the time to take that step. And you can go to reparationslegacy.org/pledge to fill out the pledge form now. And if you need some time to think about how much you can contribute, you could definitely send us an email at info@reparationslegacy.org, and we can set up a time to talk about it with you. Or you can let us know in the chat, and someone will definitely be in touch with you. Next slide. So you can also become a Reparations Legacy advocate. That's our other level. And so that is making a contribution of $500 or more. And you could take this pledge, like I said, at reparationslegacy.org/pledge. And the pledge says, I pledge to take responsibility for repairing the multi-generational damage of colonialism, slavery, and genocide against African, indigenous, and colonized peoples, the ongoing systemic violence and exploitation that forms the foundation of white prosperity. I pledge to redistribute resources to the Uhuru movement as a proactive and conscious stand of reparations, not as charity, but as the return of stolen wealth back into the hands of African people. Next slide. So I just want to take a moment to thank a few of our Reparations Legacy donors, beginning with Mark, who has been involved in the work of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement for at least 30 years. And Mark says, paying reparations to the Black Power blueprint gives us all in the white community the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the future of the planet and towards rectifying the situation we're all living in. Salute, Mark. Next slide. So Hillary, I really want to thank Hillary Gioval, who is a Reparations Legacy donor for the second year in a row. And Hillary says, this country was founded in economic violence that continues to this day. I believe those of us with access to excess resources are ethically obligated to return them through a process of reparations. Next slide, please. And so this is Lottie, and I really want to thank Lottie for being a Reparations Legacy Project donor, also for the second year in a row, and for putting the work of the Uhuru movement and the Black Power Blueprint in front of other people in her network. And Lottie says, as a descendant of enslavers, I'm both a committed advocate for reparations at the national level and a supporter of reparative action and healing at the local level. Black Power Blueprint is doing remarkable reparative work in North St. Louis. I applaud their efforts and I'm honored to be among their many contributors. I also really just want to salute and thank all of our donors so much. We really deeply appreciate your stance of solidarity in overturning this oppression of African people and all colonized people. So I just will name some people here: John R., Janice, Allie, Mark, Brookie, Matthew, Nick, Lottie, like I said, John M., Thomas, Jonathan, Carol, Connie, Marcus, Laura, Leah, Izzy, Gina, and Kent, Martha, Victoria, Zoe, Helen, the Community Arts Movement Project, and also Angelica, who happens to be in our audience. Next slide, please.
Right on. Well, I just want to join in saluting all of the Reparations Legacy donors and want to, really shout out Angelica, who's here with us, who has not only contributed reparations to these programs for several years in a row, but also worked to win the grant from camp towards the basketball court and is working to win more resources to fund these projects. So we really salute that exemplary stand of reparations. I just want to reiterate what Len said, that we are calling on people to become Reparations Legacy donors or Reparations Legacy advocates by going to reparationslegacy.org/pledge. You can fill out that form. It's very quick. And when you fill out that form, you can actually donate on the spot through the website to the Uhuru Wakulia, or you can put your pledge, how much you plan to contribute. Maybe it's not something you want to donate through a website, it's something you'd rather send us a check, or you have a donor advised fund, or some other way that you want to turn over those reparations to the work of the Black Power Blueprint. By filling out that form, somebody will get in touch with you. We will meet with you. We can talk with you more about this and work with you to start your journey into the Reparations Legacy Project. So again, you go to reparationslegacy.org/pledge. And if you are interested in contributing at any amount, because we've talked about and heard about the fact that the basketball court is being built right now as we speak, and that was over $150,000 raised towards that. And there were people like John who gave $50,000 and other large donors who contributed to that project. But there were also thousands of people who did $5, $10, $25, $100. So while we are making a special call for Reparations Legacy donors, we also want to put out a call to everybody to do whatever you can to contribute to fund the Uhuru Wakulia African Women's Health Center as reparations to African people by going to blackpowerblueprint.org/health center right now. Go to that website, make your contribution. We are going to be coming back up a little bit after Q&A, and we can announce any donations that came in, as well as any pledges, any new signups into the Reparations Legacy Project. So yeah, we just wanted to put that out there. Again, you can donate by going to blackpowerblueprint.org/health center. And the next thing we want to do, in addition to contributing reparations through turning over the resources in terms of money, another extremely significant thing you can do to take the stand of reparations is turn over your time, your skills, your passion, your energy by volunteering with the Reparations Legacy Project and joining our committee, which meets every week and which constantly has work going on. And what we're going to be focusing on for the next several months is conducting massive outreach. Like if you heard this message today and you were like, wow, millions of people need to hear that. Well, you got to join the Reparations Legacy Committee. We need you to help us get this word out to millions of people and to the people that we are targeting to get this word out. So you can join the Reparations Legacy Committee, work with us to build for our major conference on November 12th. And I'm going to talk about on the next slide. Okay, pretty much just said that. So let's go to the next slide again. First of all, look at these amazing people here. You could be one of them if you join. Oh, sorry. No, I think we go back one. Go back. There we go. Look at them. The Reparations Legacy Committee. There they are. Done an amazing job pushing this forward in the Reparations Legacy Project, as well as Amanda, who's in that committee and does a million different things involved in the give backs and just everything with the Reparations Legacy Project. I'm also in the Reparations Legacy Project. Leah in Minneapolis, we want to give a huge salute to Leah, donor who has raised thousands of dollars through her acupuncture treatments that she does as a reparations challenge in Minneapolis, and is also the grants liaison working with the grants committee under the leadership of the Office of Deputy Chair. And we want to shout out Maureen Wagner, Wendy Craig, Janice Kant, Kitty Riley, all of the members of the Solidarity Movement who work under the leadership of the Office of Deputy Chair as well, with whom the Reparations Legacy Project is honored to work with and under as well. So Leah, we have Carrie, who's now in Cincinnati, who is involved in research, writing, planned giving, Cully, who's the volunteer coordinator in Minneapolis, Rachel, who's in the room with us right now, who is the project director and just has so much amazing input on everything in the Reparations Legacy Project, and Courtney. And Courtney is in Buffalo, New York, and does a lot of graphic design and just brings a lot to the committee as well. And Bree in Moorhead, who is involved in research and writing and so many other things. So this is a great committee, and you can join this committee. You can be part of this process of winning reparations massively to the work of the Black Power Blueprint. So what you can do is you can do outreach. You can help us to develop our network of donors and contacts and supporters by, first of all, you know people. So let's introduce the Reparations Legacy Project to everyone you know, your circle of friends, your circle of contacts, your co-workers, your employer. There are people who work for companies that have grant programs and things like that. Every single person who joins this committee is a vessel through which millions of dollars of reparations can be brought into the Black Power Blueprint. So you can introduce this to your circle, your organization, your family, your university. You can do researching different targets that we could reach out to. We see people in the news, like we saw this, the white woman who created Friends, the TV show, right? She said that because of the criticism she had gotten for how extremely white that TV show is, which I think anyone who's ever seen that show is aware of that she actually said she was going to give $4 million, or maybe it was more than that, in reparations. It was actually going to Brandeis University. But nonetheless, we are trying to reach her, because if she's serious about paying reparations, she needs to fund the Black Power Blueprint. She needs to send $4 million and more to the work of the Reparations Legacy Project, the Black Power Blueprint. So we need people to help with research, grants, grant writing, grant researching. That's the kind of stuff that we need people involved in, and promotions. We need to get this out to the world. We need postering, flyering, media, social media. This needs to be, the whole world needs to know about this, and the whole world needs to be talking about this. So these are things you can do. And if you are interested in joining and volunteering with the Reparations Legacy Committee, I encourage you to come to our volunteer orientation on Sunday, July 24th at 1 p.m. Central. It will be on Zoom. You can register at tinyurl.com/RLP orientation. We will put that in the chat for you. And I just really want to, encourage everybody to sign up and get involved and build Reparations Legacy Project wherever you are. And next slide. And again, what this is all leading up to is what Len's going to tell you about before we close this out.
Thank you, Jesse. So last but not least, we really want to extend a warm invitation to everybody here to join us this year's Reparations Legacy Conference. And it will be on Saturday, November 12th. And we're really excited that this year's conference will be virtual, but it will also be in person, which is something that wasn't able to happen last year. So we're really excited, and we'd love to have everybody attend in person here in St. Louis, the city of the Black Power Blueprint. So if you come for that, you'll get to see a tour of the amazing institutions of the Black Power Blueprint. So you can register at reparationslegacy.org/register. And once you do register, we can be in touch with you about the details. So, if you're going to travel, we can work with you to, try to arrange housing or transportation. But reparationslegacy.org/register. Next.
/conference, actually. Reparationslegacy.org/conference. That's where you can go to register. Yes.
Next slide. Okay, so we are actually now at the point where we want to open it up for some discussion and some questions. We do actually have some comments from Facebook. We have John Hill Jr. from the Bronx, who says, uplifting, reparations and solidarity forever. Who, John? And Sherry Tulsa says, I'm glad that you're coming to light with this. And she says that on the Reparations Legacy Project's Facebook page. Who, Sherry, thank you. Let's see. Did anybody in the room have any questions?
Yeah. I just wanted to make a brief comment. This is an extremely important conference and project that we're involved in. And I know that we confront it all the time with the assumption that the reparations issue is a really complex issue. And most folks assume that it's just something the government's going to do, and you hear people complain about, like, well, why should I have to pay reparations, or who's going to get it? How do I know that this person who would be getting these reparations, born in America and real quote unquote descendants of African people enslaved. And they really want to make it like a real mysterious kind of thing. And there's no mystery to it. That's part of what I want to say. And that I want to say this because you should have the confidence and the ability to say that reparations are happening. It's happening now. You're just slow. It's already happening. There's reparations happening, and people are engaged in paying reparations. Who's going to get it? Who's going to get it is these projects are going to get it. The African community is going to get it. I mean, that's what's going to happen. They want to treat it like it's just something that's going to be given to different individuals that I might get it to. But it's reparations to repair the damage of people, something to that effect. And I think you have the ability to say that, I just want you to be armed with that. And we know that every colonizer is not going to pay or support the reparations, but that's all right. Because it's happening. And I think that's the thing that we really have to show. We talk about reparations. We want to give reparations, but I think the thing that we need to be able to say is reparations are being paid, that we are doing. And this is, like in the vanguard of this question. So I think that's extremely important. This woman, Jesse mentioned in terms of wanting to do something, or I saw something about somebody being a descendant of a slave. Somebody who's, bully for you. You're a colonizer, whether you're a descendant of enslaved or not. I just think that we have to take it away from, my grandmama, great grandparents owned some black people kind of stuff. The fact is that there's social wealth that's enjoyed by the colonizer that comes with the consequence of African people being colonized. us. And that we have taken the leadership on this question. We have reparations are being paid. There's no mystery to it at all. And this is some of the consequences of the reparations that's being paid. And it's being paid to an organization under the leadership of the African working class, the advanced attachment to African people's social equality, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, I just think you should be armed with that. That as opposed to simply, sometimes I think we can sound like, you know, that we're just trying to win people to reparations. I think it's important that we win people to reparations based on the fact that we got reparations happening right now. So there is no mystery whether it can happen. It is happening. These are some of the consequences.
I got a lot of it. So do we have any questions you see there in the chat?
No.
Anybody else have any questions or comments or anything?
I can comment.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, something that is really, you know, pertinent in this movement is that it's so much different than other movements in the sense of, you know, we see this playing out like in front of our eyes. We see the, you know, the determination playing out in terms of like, you know, reparations turning into all of these projects with Black Power Blueprint. So I just, you know, and I think it can't be stressed enough either because, you know, people need to see that. They need to see that, you know, these reparations that are being paid, like just as Chairman was just saying, like this is what I've been, you know, holding on to comment about, but he commented on it right before me, how, you know, we have to make them see that all of this stuff is going towards like the self-determination of African people and why that's so important and everything. So I'm just thankful that this movement exists and that, you know, it's genuinely what is going to be the solution and to, you know, everything that has come to what it has come to at this point. So I just wanted to comment about that because I'm so thankful for the movement for that reason, because, you know, there's so many other movements out there, but none of them are doing what this movement is doing. So thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? I guess we could probably invite the Chairwoman Penny up or the Chairman to say a couple things if you'd like.
Chairman? Wow, what a great event. I just really want to thank you again, Chairman. And I do understand what you were saying, of course, and that, you know, that we have to talk to white people about this is the reality, this is the money, this is this and this. But African people live this reality of colonialism as a mode of production every single day. Every single day. Police, the imposed poverty, everything the city has done, just in this city, the let it rot policy to consciously starve out the African community for the benefit of the white population. You know, for everything, we can just have a litany, and we have to bring this before white people. This is what we're talking about. It's not, oh, can't we all get along now? Because we have to pay the dues. We have to pay and repair the damage. This is what the chairman is saying. It has to be done that way. That's how we join humanity. That's our self-criticism. That's how we begin to have an honest relationship with African people, which opens the door for us to have an honest relationship with everybody else, not being the colonizer wherever we go. And so it is a powerful, I appreciate what you were saying, Alex, that this is the movement that's doing something so rapidly. Glenn was Chairman Chappelle, Deputy Chair Otis and Chappelle, and all of the party members putting this on the ground every single day, taking the resources, making it into the new world that's before us. And we've got to spread this word. We've got to build this movement, and we are doing it. You know, this is very exciting. I really want to thank everybody who came out today. You know, if you have anything else that you want to say or talk about afterwards, please feel free. And we have many other things going on coming up as has been put out. So, Chairman, would you like to come up and say words before we close out?
Earlier, when I was here, before the event began, I was looking at some photos. Somebody said it's almost like a museum in some ways, just in terms of the history of our movement and struggle. And here is a picture of a struggle that we were involved in Oakland, California. And where we were involved in a huge struggle in Oakland around all the expropriation of value, just like around the question of land, and how the so-called gentrification, where something like 80% or more of the commercial rental property in Oakland was owned by white people, most of whom didn't even live in Oakland, and more than 50% of the residential property. And they took out billions of dollars Oakland every year. And they would do similar things that you see here. They would allow properties to deteriorate, but they get tax write-offs, and they would. And the community didn't want to live there. People would have to get out, and they, just a real policy of making that kind of stuff happen. And so part of what happened is this: we were renting this place for the Woodward House. I think that formerly been an office of the Black Panther Party. And we were renting this place. We were running incredible programs out of that. And the slumlord, we got in a struggle with the slumlord, who wouldn't do repairs and things like that. So we went on a 3-year rent strike and didn't pay anything. But we built a political base. We really have organized the African people, and the party was very strong, acted like cadre. Worked every day, did work, etc. And so that members of the Solidarity Movement. And anyway, we created a situation where finally, after 3 years, the police came to evict us, and they came all, wearing black and military gear and what have you, and they surrounded the front entrance, and the people in the community were really concerned, about what they were going to do to us. And I'm talking about Oakland, California, which had a history of police attacks on the Black Panther Party and things like that. And so people thought they were seeing a repeat of the police being able to do that, and they were frightened because of that. So finally, the police did come, and they used the battering ram, and they knocked the door open. Then they were afraid to go in. I mean, they could hear, sounds inside, and we had been outside, with the demonstration, picket lines going, comrades, we can win if we just don't let them in. And so they used battering ram and knocked the door in. Then they were afraid to go in for a long time, so they stood there peeking in. And finally, when they did go in, they stayed in an inordinate amount of time because they had to come out with their tails between their legs because there was nobody in there. Because we had the night before, we had moved all the forces down to another building, and we marched up from there, and the people were applauding and what have you, but we had the base there. I'm talking about the economic base in the community that was so critical for that. So we had this institution. It was an important institution. We had incredible work going on in Oakland out of that building. And then this was the Uhuru Bakery Cafe in Oakland. That was our baby. I mean, that was an incredible institution. What's the actor's name who used to eat there all the time? Danny Glover. And, just virtually anybody who was quote unquote anybody came there. We catered movies, sets, for people doing movies. And in 1989, the year that the United States government invaded Panama, because we would do events there occasionally, but we used that to organize a picket demonstration with, I think it was the U.S. Marine recruiting states, place in Oakland. That was the stage for us. We came and organized march, etc. And then we did that, and then that night, the building was torched. But it wasn't that bad. It was bad, but it wasn't that bad. We knew we'd be able to open in a week, so you know, sort of celebrated that. Except early in the next morning, the building was torched again to make sure that we would not be able to open it up. But it was a center, it was an organizing center, it was a cultural center and things like that. But the critical thing about it was a place where these were institutions that had to be protected. And we protect these institutions with a cadre we built on the ground because they were killed, they were destroyed. They tried to shut down a furniture store in Oakland because we came out in support of an African who was killed, 4 cops there. And the community came out and set up a monument or something for him. And so the police organized, tried to organize white people to boycott our furniture store. But the fact is that we do the work on the ground among the people, and that's the thing that kept it open. That's what we have to do here too. So in addition to what we're talking about now, making the doula happen, the work to build the African People's Socialist Party is a critical aspect of this work. And I want you to keep your eyes on that project as well. We say that politics is simply concentrated economics. And the politics of our movement is politics of self-determination, anti-colonialism. And the struggle against colonialism is economics in the sense that it's to liberate the productive forces from the colonized people as the people capable of producing the land, the resources, and things that make that happen. So that's what it's about. And I just want to appreciate the splendid work that's being done here around the question of reparations. That's really something important to do, to recognize the political aspect of that as well. When you do this, it is a form of self-criticism and it is a form of class struggle. It gives you an opportunity to engage in class struggle because the class question is concentrated in the colonial issue. Otherwise, white people just fight on top of this platform, of colonialism, to get some. So that's critical. And then the real key thing is what happens in the African community to build an actual revolutionary capacity in the African community. That's the task that we're involved in as well. And you have to be open to that. You have to be seeing that and have real, genuine solidarity with that aspect of it as well. Thank you, comrades.
I just want to thank you so much again, Chairman and Chairwoman Penny. We're getting to the end of our event here, but before we do start closing out, I just want to announce some contributions that we've gotten here. I just want to thank Erica for donating $100. I also want to thank Mel, who donated $5. Leah, who registered for the Reparations Legacy Conference. Yeah, don't forget that you can also register for the conference at reparationslegacy.org/conference. And also, if you want to take that pledge, you want to go to reparationslegacy.org/pledge. And feel free to email us if you have any questions or you want to set up a time to talk. We would love to help you along with that. And email us at info@reparationslegacy.org or come and say hi to us out here. Thanks, everybody.